Good afternoon. My name's John Nonna. I'm Westchester County Attorney, and with me is Senior Assistant County Attorney Melissa Jean Rottini, who works with me and with other members of the administration on airport environmental issues. And the purpose of today's press conference is to bring the public up to date on an emerging contaminant that we're dealing with at the airport. But first, I want to put this in perspective. Westchester County Airport has an environmental management plan that has been in existence since 2004. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the airport identified certain contaminants, participated in a voluntary cleanup program through the Department of Environmental Conservation, prepared a site investigation report, and dealt with many contaminants at the airport. Groundwater testing for monitoring wells at the airport has taken place in the 1990s up until 2011, when the prior administration ceased that groundwater testing. So what was tested was monitoring wells, not drinking water wells, but wells that were drilled to monitor the groundwater to make sure that there was no threat to either the Kensico Reservoir, to the drinking water in the Kensico Reservoir, or the Blind Brook watershed. So that was the purpose of the monitoring, the remediation that took place in the early 90s and into the 2000s. The current issue that we're facing deals with a category of chemicals known as PFAS, abbreviated and called PFAS. PFASs are perfluoroalkyls or perfluorinated compounds. That's the technical term. There's over 20 different forms of PFASs, but two of them are particularly toxic and of health concern: PFOA and PFOS. Those are the two. They've been identified as significant health concerns. Where are they found? In a lot of different places. They're found in Teflon. They're found in waterproofing, things that are waterproof like Gore-Tex. They're found in stain-resistant materials like Scotchgard. Food packaging, pizza boxes have PFOA and PFOSs in them. Microwave popcorn glands. And importantly for the airport, firefighting foam, aqueous firefighting foam, abbreviated as AFFF, have these PFOAs and PFOSs in them. And this problem with these compounds and the threat to the health is an emerging issue. It just came to light in 2015. Initially, if you may have seen articles in New York State, the drinking water in Hoosick Falls was contaminated with PFOAs and PFOSs from a plant that manufactured Teflon. Petersburg, New York, where there was a plastics factory, that municipality's water supply was contaminated. So in or around the late 2000s, they were designated as unregulated contaminants and referred to sometimes as emerging contaminants. In 2016, the Environmental Protection Agency issued a health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion lifetime exposure through drinking water to PFASs and PFOSs. But no standard was established, no what's called maximum contaminant level. So this was a guideline, the 70 parts per trillion. Why are they an environmental problem at our airport? Well, the military began using firefighting foam containing PFOAs and PFOSs in the mid-60s, and in fact mandated their use at military bases and at airports with military installations. So they've been used at military airports throughout the country and at airports that had Air National Guard units. And Westchester County Airport has had an Air National Guard unit stationed at the airport from approximately the 1940s, because the airport began as a military airport, until 1983. That's when the Air National Guard left Westchester Airport to go up to Stewart Airport in Newburgh, New York. And so the Air National Guard used this firefighting foam for firefighting training. What they would do is they would spill jet fuel or aircraft fuel, start a fire, and then put it out with the firefighting foam with these chemicals in it. And that firefighting foam was then washed with water, and then that seeped into the groundwater at the airport. The result of this is that we have groundwater contamination at the airport. In June of 2017, the health department did testing of certain drinking water wells off the airport site on New King Street, which is right off the airport, and found that one commercial building was above the 70 parts per trillion recommended level, health advisory level. And that building is using drinking water at the present time, bottled drinking water rather than the well. That's the only off-site contamination that has been found in New York. In Connecticut, the Connecticut environmental authorities did some testing on King Street, which is right off the airport property in Connecticut. They tested about 10 homes, and they found one with levels above the 70 parts per trillion. In November of 2017, the county tested 8 monitoring wells and got the results in March of 2018. And 8 wells tested above the 70 parts per 4 wells tested, excuse me, 4 of the 8 tested above the 70 parts per trillion. That's a lot of detail, but I think it's important to know how this problem emerged and how we're dealing with it. Now, the new administration, County Executive George Latimer, resumed the biannual, twice a year, groundwater testing of these monitoring wells. That testing was ceased in the prior administration, so there was no testing between approximately 2010 and 2011 and 2018. 52 monitoring wells on the airport site were tested. Again, these are not drinking water wells, they're testing wells to check where the groundwater is going, what contaminants they may be, and whether there's any threat to drinking water supplies. So the results we got, the wells were tested in August and September of 2018 for over 20 PFAS compounds, including PFOA, PFOS, and a whole bunch of other compounds with these chemicals in them. And the results were that 26 of the 52 wells had PFOA and PFOS levels above 70 parts per trillion. And the concentration of this excessive amount was in where the Air National Guard conducted these firefighting training exercises, what we call the burn pit, where they would pour jet fuel, burn it, and then burn the jet fuel, and then put the fire out with firefighting foam. So that's the problem. How are we addressing that problem? Well, we've retained consultants to determine where this groundwater that is contaminated is going. Is it a threat to the Kensico Reservoir or to the Blind Brook watershed? And we're continuing to test monitoring wells, but also doing surface water testing, looking at where surface water may be going that may be contaminated. We also work together with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. It's their responsibility to test the Kensico Reservoir. And their last test, which was in 2017, in a report that was issued at the end of 2017, the New York City Department of Environmental Protection reported that there was no detection of PFAS chemicals in the Kensico Reservoir. They've advised us that they're not concerned that PFASs are a threat to the reservoir or to the drinking water that goes to New York City. We're in frequent communication with the New York City DEP, and we're in contact with them to determine when they do their next test and what the results of that test will be. So what about what's being done at the airport currently? So we don't have any firefighting foam with PFOA or PFOSs that is being used at the airport. The firefighting training that is done, and this firefighting training that needs to be done, is done using water. There are tenants that use firefighting foam if there's a fire. They don't do any testing, so there's no constant threat to groundwater. But if there was a fire in one of their hangars, they would use a firefighting foam, and that foam would go to the stormwater sewer and be discharged through a wastewater treatment plant. If there were a fire, there is firefighting foam. It doesn't contain PFOA and PFOSs, but if there's a fire, they will use firefighting foam to put out the fire, because frankly, if there's a burning aircraft, the survival of the passengers and the life of the passengers will be the top priority. What else are we doing? We're negotiating. We're in close contact with the Department of Environmental Conservation of New York State. We're working with them on a consent decree to formulate a work plan and a remediation plan. We have, in fact, have a meeting with the New York Department next Friday that we're attending with our consultants to talk about what they're doing, how they're measuring where this groundwater may be going, and to keep the New York State DEC advised about what we're doing and to work together with them. We have also kept environmental groups advised of our work, and we welcome any suggestions they have as to what we can do. They recommended that we look at the groundwater and where the surface water and when that's going. We adopted that recommendation. We've had 2 meetings with environmental groups since the 2018 since the latter administration came into existence. What we are waiting for is the establishment of a standard. As I mentioned at the outset, this was a health advisory, but there's no standard that has to be met by any remediation. And we're waiting for the New York State Health Department to establish that standard. The New York Drinking Water Quality Council, which is a nonpartisan, neutral group of experts, has recommended that the standard be 10 parts per trillion. Some states have gone to 13 parts per trillion. New Jersey is one of them. The New York Drinking Water Quality Council. And they have a report. I can provide you with a copy. Is that right? Did I get the name right? I think I got the name right. So we're looking to see what standard the New York Health Department will establish, so we would have to remediate to that standard and develop a remediation plan. I have to add one more important point. Lawsuits have been brought against the manufacturers of this firefighting foam with the PFOA and PFOSs, and against the Air National Guard. And we have given notice to the manufacturers and the National Guard, Air National Guard, that we are commencing a lawsuit. There's a requirement in the law that we give 90 days notice. We have given that notice. That time period expires in May, so we will be filing our lawsuit in May. We have also been working with our 2 senators and our Congresswoman Lowy in order to see what federal funding may be available to the extent for any remediation that we have to do. And that's a report, so I'm happy to answer any questions from the press. Yes, Mr. McKay.
When you say that, so you have 26 of the monitoring wells that showed over the 70
Yes.
parts per trillion. How high did it go in the highest?
It went to 1,000 parts per trillion in the burn pit, right?
Of the combined 21,
Of all the PFASs together.
of the individual PFOA and PFOS.
So we test for all of them. We test for the entire, over 20 different compounds.
But there was one well that had over 1,000?
Yeah, in the burn pit.
I guess prior
Hi, Ty.
to the last administration, how you doing, John? There was testing 2 times per year. I guess Astorino administration did away with that. Some local homeowners in that neighborhood would like to see a law pass so that it could go back to 2 times mandatory testing of the wells. Is that something that you guys would get on board with, or?
Sure. I mean, that would prevent any future county executive from eliminating the program. I think it's an important program.
Right. And how certain are you that that water in the groundwater is not going to affect the drinking water? Because that's what folks are most concerned about.
Right. Well, that's why we hired consultants and they're still doing the research. It's not simple research to
Right.
determine where this groundwater is migrating. So that's in progress right now. And we are in contact with the New York City DEP, which does test the Kensico Reservoir.
So you really don't know.
Other than the report we got from New York City DEP that they don't see any threat to the drinking water in the Kensico Reservoir.
Okay. So should folks be concerned that it's going to spread while you wait for the report from New York City?
Well, it hasn't spread so far, we know, to the Kensico Reservoir. Or at least the New York City has told us it's not a threat to the drinking water supply in the Kensico Reservoir. So I really don't think people should be alarmed or overly concerned until we get some final results. Yes, sir.
How is water provided at the airport? Are you on a water system there?
Yes.
Do you have a well?
Westchester Joint Waterworks, I think, supplies the public water supply to the airport. So there is no drinking water supply from wells at the airport.
Okay, you're not using that water.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, those were just testing wells. They were not drinking. They were never drinking water wells.
How deep are those wells?
That's a good question. You know? You probably know.
There are two types of wells. There are bedrock wells, and then there are, I forget the name of the next level up, but there's two levels of wells, so they're checking. And now with the surface water also being checked, we're checking at multiple levels to see what's going on, so they can determine, as Mr. Nona said, where it's going.
How many feet below the surface is the bedrock well?
I think it would depend on where they hit bedrock when they drill the well. Sorry, I don't know
Yeah.
exactly how deep they are, but it would be wherever they hit bedrock. That does change depending on where you are.
Great, okay, thank you.